Jeana McClure taught herself HTML in 1995. She has been working on web applications ever since. She's an IT senior business analyst at Portland General Electric, a certified Scrum Master, and a certified product owner. Jeana has a bachelor's degree in applied linguistics and a master's degree in library science. And today she will share her Scrum team's experience before and after adopting BDD and demonstrate how to write acceptance criteria using BDD's given when then structure. Please welcome Jeana McClure.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Oh, good. Good afternoon. Welcome. I know it's about that time when I want to have a nap, so thank you for being here. I haven't been in an auditorium for a while, so I feel like breaking into song, but I won't inflict that on you. So I am here to tell you how you can use this behavior-driven development structure to eliminate ambiguity in your acceptance criteria for your user stories. So that is kind of the objective here, is for you to walk out understanding how given when then works and how you can use it in your practice. So before I actually start, I wanted to know how many of you are actually business analysts? A fair number of you. So what are the rest of you? QA? Any developers in the room? Okay, that's good. Have any of you used behavior-driven development before? A handful. And how many of you are working in a Scrum or an Agile environment? About half of you? Okay. Well, that's good to know. The agenda that we're going to look at here is I'm going to tell you why I like BDD acceptance criteria and why I am, a forceful advocate for it at PGE. For those of you who aren't familiar with Scrum, I have a really brief overview, probably more like 3 or 4 minutes, not 5 to 7. We can do that. And then we're going to have a little bit of science. I'm going to tell you my experience with my team I worked on, Team Awesome. And then we're going to get into some examples, actually quite a few examples of how this works. These examples are based on the work I actually did on a project in 2012. And then we'll have questions. And if you have questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand or throw something, get my attention. I don't mind. You're not going to interrupt the flow. So BDD stands for Behavior-Driven Development. There's a lot more to BDD than merely writing acceptance criteria, but this is the little piece that we latched onto. We were having a little problem with people going in different directions, and so I wanted to figure out a way to write the acceptance criteria for our user stories in a way that was clear and concise and complete, because I hate getting to the end of a sprint and realizing that we haven't delivered business value because the requirements were incomplete or somebody was confused. I don't like being misunderstood, and I don't like repeating myself either. So BDD was a really good formula for us to be able to make sure everybody was on the same page. The proof was that at the end of this project where we initiated the BDD practice, we ended up going through regression with absolutely no defects at all. And that never, in the history of my tenure at PGE, ever happened. So while I'm sure a lot of it was attributable to the skill of Team Awesome, they also thought that it was implementing this BDD practice that really helped us to get through regression with no defects at all. Yeah? The project was to rewrite our most complex web transaction. It took about a year and a few months. We started as an Agile team, and it was a team that had been in formation before I actually joined them. And the way we were writing acceptance criteria was kind of a laundry list of stuff. And we, about halfway through, got into some trouble with a couple sprints. The QA went one way and developers went another way, and we thought, how can we stay on the same page? And so about halfway through is when we actually implemented this. So does that answer your question?
Sure. How many members of the team?
I think there were about 4 or 5 developers, 2 QA, Scrum Master, the BA. At PG, where I work, there's usually an embedded BA on the Scrum team. They and the product owner kind of split the accountabilities of the product owner, sort of in the more traditional Scrum. The product owner deals mostly with stakeholder engagement and communication, And the BA is actually the one who's writing the stories and the acceptance criteria and working with the team. So,
Thanks.
you're welcome. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Scrum, the team is the Scrum Master, the product owner, some developers and some QA, and like I said, at PGE, an embedded BA. And then you have your stakeholders, business clients, business sponsors, subject matter experts. The product owner and the BA together, at PGE anyway, work with those stakeholders to drive out the business requirements, which are then turned into stories, which have acceptance criteria and tasks and so forth. All of those features and functions and needs and wants that the business have go into a product backlog, which is supposed to be ordered in the business value priority by the product owner. And then the team will pull in whatever's at the top of that list on any given sprint. Sprint usually anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks long. The team will commit to a certain number of stories. And then during that sprint, you start with your planning day, and then you do a daily stand-up, and they work through it. You get to the end, you have something you can demo to your clients, and then you have a retrospective at the end of that sprint and say, what worked really well, what do we want to keep doing, what didn't work very well at all, and what do we want to change? Does that sound familiar to you guys? Yeah? Yeah. Heads are nodding, good. So your backlog is made up of epics, for instance, SelfService Banking. And those epics are decomposed into user stories that represent discrete functionality. So like part of SelfService Banking is I want to deposit some money, or I want to get some cash, or I want to transfer money. And underneath those user stories, you have acceptance tests or acceptance criteria. And these are how you QA people know that you hit the target, that you delivered the value and the functionality that your business clients are expecting to get out of these user stories. And then underneath that are all the tasks for your developers and your QA to actually build the story. So that brings us to the science moment. So in all of that, there's a lot of language. I mean, we write user stories, we write acceptance criteria. And as Anna said, I got my undergrad degree in linguistics, and one of my favorite classes was semantics. And we talked a lot about the meaning of language and how ambiguous it can be. And so I'm going to do a little piece of science right here. And I'm going to flash a word up on the screen in a second. And I don't want anybody to say anything first, but just hold in your head the first image that comes to mind when you see this word. Okay? Everybody ready? Okay. So, show of hands. When this came up, who saw this in their mind? It's very timely. It's Halloween, right? And who saw that? Some of you. So there, right there, is a perfect example of how a single word can have two meanings. It can mean different things to different people, even in context. I mean, the bat flew into the outfield, right? You could stop there, but it's still, you don't know which kind of bat. So until you add additional context to it, the bat flew out of the batter's hands into the outfield, or the bat flew into the outfield and into the center fielder's hair. Doesn't let you know which meaning of that word that you're really looking for until you add context. And for me, that's what the given, when, then construct for acceptance criteria really allowed us to do, is get very, very explicit about what the context is for that acceptance criteria. So like I said, I had this team awesome, and they were really fantastic, brilliant people. But we did run into a couple of sprints, 2 in a row, where we got halfway through, and QA's going one direction, and the developers are going another direction, and nobody's really hitting the bullseye. And so we talked about it at one of our retrospectives, and I had read about this BDD like a year and a half prior to that, before I even came to this team, but had never really had a chance to do it. I mean, we know that user stories have a very explicit syntax, right? So it's as a role, I need some feature or function so that some business value is realized to me, to the business. Very straightforward, very helpful in writing user stories. But I hadn't found anything up to that point that I could use as a similar sort of syntax for writing acceptance criteria. And then I found Dan North's site. Has anybody else discovered Dan North's website? A few of you have. Alicia, you don't count. So this little quote really spoke to me, because this is all about eliminating that ambiguity. And so it's really very straightforward. So given some precondition, or maybe another 1 or 2 or 3, when some action occurs, then some outcome happens. And then maybe something else happens, and maybe something else happens. So it took me a while to kind of wrap my brain around how to deconstruct this to fit into this structure. And I have to say, not everything fits into this structure. I mean, this is really about behavior. So if you're writing stories just about system behavior, sometimes it seems kind of artificial to contort it into this structure. But for many things that involve people interacting with systems, for me, it really worked. This is an example from Dan North's website, actually, and it's about that self-service banking thing again. So the story here is, as a customer, I want to withdraw cash from an ATM so I don't have to wait in line at the bank. It's pretty straightforward. And there's a couple of conditions. Your account can have some money in it, and then the acceptance test looks like this. So given there is money in the account, and the card's valid, and the dispenser contains cash, all your preconditions. When the customer requests the cash, that's your action, then ensure the account's debited, ensure cash is dispensed, and ensure that the card is returned. You can have another condition in which your account's overdrawn. So in this case, the preconditions are a little bit different, and the postconditions are a little bit different. The action is the same. So given that the account's overdrawn, and the card's valid, and the dispenser contains some cash, when the customer requests some cash, then ensure that a rejection message is displayed, ensure the cash is not dispensed, and ensure the card's returned. This seemed like a revelation to me. It was brilliant. Before we started using this is kind of what our stories look like. This is a story to collect the customer phone number. Like I said, this transaction is one of our most complicated transactions we ever do with customers. And we collect a lot of information from them. So the story is, as a customer service rep, I want to collect the customer's most up-to-date phone number so I can contact them for billing or meter access issues. So before we started using BDD, I mean, this is what our acceptance test looked like. Basically a bulleted list of stuff. Not in any particular order, just depended on how orderly I was feeling on any given day. It's like a process of discovery. We'd write stuff and add it to the list, and it's just kind of this mishmash and jumble. And people would miss things, or it's like, oh yeah, I didn't read that one. I was always telling them, read all of the words. Please read all of the words when you're looking at this. So when we started using this, they agreed to try it on a temporary basis and see if it helped us get over this sort of misdirection that we were having. And so we started writing using this given when then. So at the after here, same story. As a customer service rep, I want to collect customers' most up-to-date phone numbers so I can contact them for billing and meter access issues. So we ended up with multiple pieces of acceptance criteria, just like we did before, but we were able to kind of combine a couple of those. If you write it well, you can actually take some of those discrete pieces of information, and some of them will end up in a precondition, and some of them will end up in a postcondition. But this one is, we're going to display the service location phone number. So given that a customer is using the online form to move their service, when the customer navigates to this additional information page, then their service location phone for the current address is going to display as their primary phone. I don't know if you have a lot of context for this, but most transactions, if somebody wants to have your phone number, I want to know how to contact you. So if we have it on file, we're going to display it. So do you have any questions at this point? Is this making sense? Nods. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, two things. One is, you used the word complete in reference to the definition of behavior-driven development. And I would wonder how you know when something is complete. And the second thing is, there's a lot of verbiage here that could be interpreted in different ways, like your batch example. So it seems like, how do you get a handle on all that?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because just writing the acceptance criteria this way wasn't the whole story. What we did as a group is that we would sit down. I mean, that team had like 3 story times every sprint. We had 3-week sprints, and we would meet for story time 3 times during that period of time. And so we would have reviewed these more than once. And so usually it was very iterative. I would put something in front of the team, and they would say, oh, well, that's great, but what about this, 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 and this? because we had some excellent QA people on there who know our systems like in their sleep. And so then I was able to go back to the business and say, okay, well, the team said this, 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 and this. You know, how do you want to handle that? How do you want to handle that? Go back, refine it. So it was basically, it was really iterative. That's how we got to complete. And after the team committed to doing the story in a sprint, we would actually sit down collectively and review the acceptance criteria line by line before they started working on it. Again, I mean, because we really were going off the rails a little bit, and so we really made an effort to work this process. And that's how we tried to make sure it was complete and unambiguous. And we would oftentimes revise these on the fly that day, because inevitably they would commit to it, and then still, again, QA would say, oh yeah, well I forgot about X. Or a developer would say, oh, you know, I hadn't really thought about that. I don't think we can do that. How about, you know, whatever. And so we really just kept talking and talking and talking it through. Thank God they didn't just rely on me. Yeah?
Are these the only elements here? You also have conditional elements in there. Conditional, yeah.
Conditional elements?
Yeah, like if this happens, then do this.
How did we deal with that? We tried to keep them very discreet. We tried to write different acceptance criteria. I'm trying to think of an example of when that would happen. The other thing that we didn't do is we didn't write the negative test cases. So while the QA testers would take this as a starting point, they would then, you know, write those negative test scenarios. I mean, that was a conscious decision by the team, because it's like I said, you know, I can be writing this stuff for days if you want me to write an acceptance criteria for every single condition. And they said, let's, you know, write like the 80%, and then QA would flesh out the other stuff. Does that get to your question?
But there are other notations out there which can embed given, when, if, then. I was just wondering if this technique you use, method you're using, has that kind of structure in mind.
You know, they've really matured this practice. I'm not on this team right now, so I will have to ask them if they have done that.
There are some other keywords that can be used. So there's also but and not that can be used with that, as well as and.
Yeah, I know I have used it.
So do you take these and automate them?
Yes.
Yes,
So you're writing code that can consume these directly?
yes.
What are you guys using to do that?
Cucumber?
Cucumber? Have you used SpecFlow?
No. Seen it, haven't used
Yeah, I know some of our teams are using SpecFlow to do exactly that. You had a question?
it. No, it's just
SpecFlow? Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Mostly what I've got after this point is just a bunch of examples which we can go through or not. Here's another one. You know, the primary phone number is required. So this one actually has multiple and statements in the preconditions. And what we have since done is when we look at these preconditions, and there's a lot of them that are repetitive, you know, like most of our stuff is like, given that you're a customer and you're registered for online service and you've logged in and you select an account, I mean, that's repetitive. And so a lot of times we'll extract that and put that into an assumption. You know, assume for this story, all of these conditions apply. And that way we can skip all that in the given when thens and get right to the other stuff. It doesn't get so tediously repetitive.
Cucumber has a background keyword that will do that same thing, so you don't have to repeat it over and over again.
Yeah, it gets tiresome for everybody. Did anybody back there have, I thought I saw a hand up there in the back. No? Okay. So this is, again, more examples. Here's another one. As a customer, I want a confirmation message when my request to start service has been completed, so I know the power will be turned on when I'm ready to move in. So this piece of acceptance criteria is for when that online registration is successful. So given that a customer's request is completed successfully and the customer has provided an email address and password, when the customer's new electricity account has been associated to their website user ID, then a message confirming that the request to start electric service has been processed and their account's been registered for online service is sent to the customer's email address. So the interesting thing about this method is that it really just uses plain English. I mean, you don't have to be technical, and you shouldn't be technical. And the thing that we agreed as a team is let's not be specific about the system that we're using, because especially, I don't know what your experience is, but when I'm talking to like the business side, they're very prescriptive. I want it to say this, I want it to look like this, I want it to behave like that. So, what I try to do as the BA is like, let's really get to what do you want the outcome to be, and let the team figure out what method to use. And so writing the acceptance criteria this way pulls all that technology jargon out of it, and really it's just, these are the preconditions, and here's what I want to happen at the end, and you guys figure out how to make that happen. So here's one when they don't request an online registration. It's essentially the same thing. Given all this stuff, they haven't requested it. When the start service request has been processed, then a message is sent. This is how one of our developers, I don't know how clear this screenshot is, but one of our developers was able to consume this. Again, this is early days when we were adopting this, to take these pieces of acceptance criteria and pull them directly into code. A few modifications. They were able to spit out some like functional testing. Our QA team used this with, I think they were writing QAS test scripts. It escapes me now. But they were able to do the same thing and automate all these tests. And so that's one of the reasons we were able to get to 0 regression defects when we launched this, is because through the course of the multiple sprints it took to complete this, they were running these tests over and over and over and over and over again. And so it was very easy for them to figure out when something wasn't working out. So when I told the team that I was going to be speaking, I asked them for some input, what they felt the value of doing this was. And so this is just some comments from them. BDD allowed us to write automated unit and functional tests and automated integration tests. When acceptance criteria was complex, it made it easy to follow. It helped us ask the right questions around the acceptance criteria during those story times. They really felt that it was key. I mean, aside from the fact that they're all brilliant, they really thought it was key in helping us get into regression or getting out of regression with no defects. And really the whole point, which it really helped to remove some ambiguity from our requirements. So you have another question?
Yeah, so you just said something like they've gone out of regression. What do you mean by that?
Well, the way it works here, we do unit testing in the aisle, in the team. They do functional testing, but then we have an entirely separate QA team that does regression testing. It takes this new functionality and tests it against everything else that's on the side that we may not have touched. And what was typical is that it would go into regression testing and it would come, they would have defects anywhere from 10 to 100, just depending on the project. And so this was the first project that had gone into that process and went all the way through and didn't have any defects. They couldn't find anything that was wrong. And I mean, we were all ecstatic, of course. And since then, same team has continued this practice. It's kind of spread to other teams. And that particular team has done 2 other projects after the one that I worked on. The second one also went through regression and into production, no defects. The one after that, I think they had like less than 5 defects, which for the kind of work that we've been doing over the years is really a phenomenal success rate. And they attribute it to doing the BDD, being really, really clear on having agreement from the team, and on automating all those tests.
What practice were they following prior to BDD?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What practice were they following prior to BDD? How did they write requirements?
Well, it was kind of that first list that I showed you, just a bulleted list of stuff with varying degrees of completeness. And what we found is providing the structure of BDD allowed us to make sure that our requirements were more complete. Our QA people were phenomenal. They would come up with use cases that I'm like, no real human is ever going to do that. And then we launched, and like within days, real humans were doing that thing that I said they would never do. So we had some really great minds working on all of this, and this provided us with a framework to sort of provide some structure around it.
If you're not doing this now, why aren't you doing it?
We are, but it hasn't, some are and some aren't.
And I mean, and you, because you've
Me?
got that team that you're doing
Yeah, they kicked me off the island. No, they didn't really. I moved to a different team that was doing O&M maintenance work. And so we have tried to adopt this for O&M maintenance work as well. The team that I was on is still using this very successfully. And it's sort of, I think, it's a standard that we've adopted now, but we have varying degrees of maturity within the organization as to the effectiveness of it. And so, we continue to work with each other as a group of BAs. We'll do peer reviews, say, yeah, that's hitting the mark. I don't think you quite got it. Some projects don't lend themselves to Agile at all. I don't know, Alicia, do you have any further comments on that?
Not really. I mean, yeah, so Jeana's moved to another team. A lot of the things that they're doing on the team she was on, are tiny little technical tweaks. And so this is sort of overblown for what they're trying to do. It's a lot easier to just have a one short little statement. So it's just not used as frequently on those teams. Some of our other teams have adopted this.
Yeah, with varying degrees of success.
So much of it, the success that this team had to do with the whole team. This was one really important part. But you also had a team of, like she said, phenomenal developers and testers and product owner, and all these people came together to be really successful. And not all of the teams are laid out exactly that way.
Well, and that team that I was on had a history of stability as well, which is we have learned is really important if you're going to do Scrum work. Is that team has to really know how to have those hard conversations with each other. I mean, we would have knockdown, drag out, civil disagreements about what was or shouldn't be in a piece of acceptance criteria. So I mean, part of it was team dynamic. Does that answer your question to some degree? You had a question too.
Yes, so I'm just recently getting into understanding what BDD is. And I'm trying to find out how it fits into the Agile framework as far as where it goes. I'm more familiar with, so we're using Jeana to create our stories, and from our stories we have acceptance criteria, and then that kind of filters down to QA. So where would you store the BDD stuff?
Where do we store it?
Yeah, how does it get, where's the point of record for it?
Well, we use version 1. Is our tool that we use. And so in version 1, each story has, slots to put acceptance criteria that's attached to that story. You can attach, well, actually you work down from epics. So each epic can have, its child stories. And so the acceptance criteria is attached to the specific story.
Is your acceptance criteria
Yes.
in that format?
Yeah.
Right now we just use bullet points, and we use different stories for different, we have different stories in our epics. But our acceptance criteria does not look like BDD stuff.
Why not?
That you're doing.
Yeah,
Why not?
is,
Because, I mean, we use Jira.
It makes good sense. So this would replace what we're currently doing.
are you doing like the bulleted list like I showed earlier?
Yeah, smaller. So
Yeah.
one story might capture like 4 or 5 items versus 10.
Yeah.
Or it might only capture 2 items. criteria under that, you would list the BDD given, when, then format. That was okay.
Yeah, I mean, I usually would create a title for the acceptance tests, some verb, noun phrase, add phone number. That's the acceptance criteria label, but then underneath it is the given, then, when. Given, when, then.
And are those varied? So let's say I have a story, and let's say the story is add phone number. How many BDDs would you add to that one?
Well, that's a very good question. I like to load up stories with a whole bunch of BDD, and the team doesn't like that. They want to slice them smaller. And so we're always in search of, the one-day story that you can finish. So we try really hard to keep things vertical. But sometimes we'll deal with things like exception, error message, error handling will be a separate story. So, and we try to do the iterative thing where you start with, your minimal feature set. So, the minimal feature set is, I need to collect a phone number. That could be a story. And then you need to validate the phone number. You need to validate that there's not letters or, special characters in it. So that could be another story. So it really just depends on what the team wants to do. I mean, that's kind of how we approached it. Is
Let me ask you a philosophical question, and more in relationship to change in your organization. See, probably a year ago, we weren't being very systematic in our acceptance criteria. So we were finally getting that from products, where they'll give us something. So implementing BDD sounds like a great idea, but how would you go about actually being successful at that with a organization that is trying to move that direction, but slowly?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And to me, where my mind goes is, who's the BDD for? Who's the acceptance criteria for? If it's for your team, if it's for a QA and the developers to know that I've delivered the functionality the client is asking for, then that's one thing. If it's something that you want to show to a client, then I'm not entirely sure BDD is probably the right format to use, because it can be repetitive. And Jane, do you have a?
That's exactly where I was waiting. So I can see how it works really well for business analysts and testers.
Yeah.
But I assume you had a business side product owner you were working with.
Yes.
How did they grapple? Because they should be accepting these stories based on the acceptance criteria.
Well, we were really lucky on this project that, we had multiple meetings with the stakeholders and the subject matter experts. We were all in the room, and we would take all of their input, in their business language, and then I would try and translate it for the team. But it would always go back to the business, say, this is what you asked for. This is what you said you wanted to have happen with this particular piece of it. This is how you want this information processed. This is how you want this information stored. This is how you want this accessible to you later. And so it was a little bit of a translation exercise. The immediate problem that we were trying to solve by implementing this was, we're not communicating as a team. We're not on the same page. And so that was kind of why we did this. But yeah, using this to communicate back to clients, I'm not
sure that's what we'd be using.
Yeah.
We're primarily using acceptance criteria for our requirements definition for our engineers, and the design feed into that, and then obviously QA develops test cases based upon it. So that's kind of where, can be used globally like that, minus the customer side.
I think so. Yeah. You had a comment or question?
So you mentioned about a lot of heavy discussions, passionate discussions about what these look like. Was this actually tied in when you were doing grooming of the stories that you also grew the acceptance?
Yeah. Yes. We had a couple different techniques, but yeah, we would take the stories into the story time and we'd talk about them and groom them. They'd always have first round. They'd always have other questions, for the business, because they know things from the system and that the business doesn't have a clue about. And so the business would say, I want blah, I want unicorns, and they're saying, we can't give them to you because they don't exist. And so there was a little bit of that back and forth. So we did go over this repeatedly in those story time grooming sessions. And And then we'd have another conversation on planning day, when they were pulling the stories they wanted to work on. And then again, we would have that special acceptance criteria review before they started work on anything. And even at the 11th hour, we'd have, new things come up. So, you had a question?
How do you keep that from causing your sprint planning and the unofficial sprint planning? It seems like a lot of verbiage, and it would cause the product owner to be spending a week and a half building up these things for a 2-week sprint. Did you find, in comparison, like the amount of effort it took you to write the bullet points, how long did it take you to write the given that long?
Well, that's one benefit of the way PGE fulfills the role of the product owner. It's really filled by two people. So the product owner is dealing with the communication to the client and really elicitation of big level or high level requirements. And then the business analyst is the one who's spending the time writing this. But the BA and the PO are in those requirements gathering sessions with those clients together. And so what I found is, once I had a basic understanding, and also I did have a little bit of an advantage because I've been working on this website for 14 years, and so I kind of knew it already. And so I was pretty easily able to, say, okay, this is what they want, and then spit it all out. And it really, the structure actually made it easier for me, because it was really, it's like, what's the trigger? For me, the key was, what's the when? What's the action that we need to have happen here? And sometimes I wouldn't know how to start it, I wouldn't know how it ended, but if I could pinpoint that when statement, that really just made it all click.
I'm sold on that.
Yeah. You have another question?
You mentioned a couple of times this is for Agile, for Scrum. What would be the problems of using this for a longer period when you have a project that may be going for a month or 3 months?
I don't personally see a problem at all. I mean, and our sprints, well, we're using sprints in Agile, but some of these projects end up being long. We're not quite effective with the whole releasable bundle thing yet, delivering incremental business value repetitively. We kind of, build it and build it and build it, and then we do a big bang. So it ends up being over time. And sometimes that is a problem, because you got a story you wrote very early on with one understanding, and then you iterate on it, and then you get to the end, and you got a whole other thing. So going back over time and trying to gather it all up at the end of the project is a little nightmare. But
So did you automate these tests? It sounded like you did.
yes,
But they weren't integrated in with your build system? Is that when
not yet.
checked in?
That's
Still on.
yeah. We're right there. Thinking, you should really do this. Baby steps. You have a question?
So for a company that doesn't have a business analyst, is the product owner included with writing and updating?
That's my understanding of the traditional Scrum framework. The product owner is the one who is, writing those user stories, writing those business requirements with the business and conveying that to the team.
So our product owner will write some initial ones, and then, like you said, the QA person will take that and expand on those. So will our developers.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does become a whole team effort to come up with these. And we don't have business analysts.
Yeah, well, and really, even at PGE, anybody can put a story on the backlog. I mean, we've said, if you're a business person, or you can put a story on there. But then the BA is still accountable for grooming that story and working with the team on the requirements. That's just how it works here. We have 5 more minutes. We have 4 more minutes. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Yeah.
What would you say is the most difficult hindrance to implementing BDD at your organization? It sounds like there were contexts that it worked less well in, but were there any
Not really. I mean, I think it just comes down to committing to doing it and getting over the learning curve. I mean, it's sometimes it's difficult to kind of tease these things apart in this way and go, what? Well, is that really an outcome, or is that the trigger, or is that a precondition? You know, and so it really, in my mind, requires you to be able to deconstruct things, and then put them back together again. But I mean, I don't think there's any institutional hurdles or cultural hurdles. I mean, unless it's just, you know, people saying I'm not going to do it, which happens. So, you had a question?
What can be done to ameliorate the issue if a team is not co-located?
Oh, geez. I have no answer for that. I don't know, Skype.
Well, actually, the BDD is a great tool for teams that are not located together, because you're making it clear, concise, and complete, going to your second slide, communication going back and forth on continuum. And if you'll just do a comprehensive list of BDD for our acceptance criteria BDD in each of the stories, it'd be wonderful. I mean, you'll have everybody be on the same page. You don't need people co-located.
So I actually have a question for you guys. Let me start over. In your experience, is your experience dramatically different from anything that I've talked about here? Those of you who are working with Scrum, does it seem pretty common? Yes, Anna?
So it's different because people's commitment is different. I think what you keep on reiterating, maybe you don't notice it, is that it's an exceptional team. And they really stuck to it, and they used it, and they talk about problems, and you were an exceptional BA. Seriously, because I worked in a Scrum for many years, and I have not seen the commitment from being like that.
Yeah.
They always say, like, no, we don't have time.
Ah. It's like, what are you doing then?
It's still, it's people over process.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to actually echo what you said, but wanted to provide a solution, though. In the 2 or 3 companies, 3 companies now, I guess, that we've had Agile and tried to use BDD, the business analysts don't do it. They like hey, listen, I just want to flow conscious, I just want to list a bunch of bullet items. But the way that I have handled that in the teams is that I just rewrite everything in BDD and push it back at them. And they'll say, yeah, I agree, that you got it. And I think that's, that's a real solution, but it requires personal commitment on your QA team to do that, because it is sort of tiresome.
Well, I'm a big dork, and I like this. It's like a word puzzle to me, and so to me, it was a puzzle to figure out every single day is how to make it work in this. So, I mean, I liked doing it that way. So, everyone should do it.
That was a differentiator.
Maybe. One more comment?
How many of the steps was your team able to reuse? How much reuse that you got out of it that maybe facilitated and sped up the test automation process?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I think quite a lot. I know that once we got into the groove, they were able to simply tweak stories as we iterated, tweak the test as we iterated through the stories.
So as you were writing the given when the acceptance criteria, did you reuse similar tests?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Because then once you reuse them, then they just reuse that part.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why we sat down and I kept telling them read all the words, because I did reuse so much of it, because I wanted to be consistent. And that can be, your eyes glaze over the 10th time you've read the same set of preconditions. But yeah, I'd reused a lot. So I think I'm out of time. So I just want to confirm that we met our objective, which was for you to understand this structure a little bit better. Yes? Show of hands? No? Indifferent? Okay. And I think that's it, except for the obligatory internet kitty picture that you have to have at the end of every presentation. So thank you all very much. Great questions.